Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review a Netflix show called Sick Note. This was a 6 episode first season, and so for reasons I was just like, man, this is an easy blow through show to go through. And ultimately the concept is really odd because I'm like, how is it that you're gonna have people invest in your characters when the concept is just kind of a little bit wonky? It's kind of because it's ultimately just like, how are you gonna get people to like your characters when ultimately you throw a concept like this out here? Because a lot of people are just like, I don't like this show because I don't like the concept, I don't like this and this and that. But reasonably, when looking at it, it seems like we could buy into this just because of the well-rounded cast that is otherwise provided in the show. We have Rupert Grint, which hope I'm pronouncing that right. Could be completely wrong. Ultimately, the guy who had played Ron Weasley in Harry Potter ultimately is in this show. He is the main character. We have Nick Frost, who is ultimately on movies like Shaun of the Dead, or more recently Fighting with My Family, the Dwayne The Rock Johnson movie. We also have, speaking of Johnson, we have Don Johnson, who ultimately a lot of people might know currently from the HBO show The Watchmen, and also a number of other huge amounts of other shows like Miami Vice, From Dusk Till Dawn, the TV show, and also uh, Nash Bridges. Yeah, there we go. Like, I should know all these because I've said them repetitiously. So, going into this show, ultimately, you can find this show on Netflix if you insist on wanting to get into this show. Because ultimately, maybe you are feeling a little bit under the weather, or maybe you wanted to snuggle up onto your couch and instead of watching reruns of Price is Right because you're feeling a little bit of the boogie woogie flu, maybe instead you want to go and to watch Sick Note, which ultimately is again a Netflix film or a Netflix show. Going into this, weird premise, but ultimately after that, I really enjoy how the actors are really through this entire series walking on eggshells. Like it feels like at any second they are going to get caught by something. It seems like most of these characters have a consistent paranoia, which I do really like about this show. Like it feels like at any point that these people are going to have everything blow up completely in their face. And how basically it gets to the point to where they're desperately trying as much as possible to keep a secret, but eventually they find out that there's so many other supporting characters in their show that are also keeping secrets as well. And once they find out about said secrets, it continues to make for a very interesting show. Don Johnson, good God, how many profanity like words and how many times does he have to repeatedly say something to get to the point of certain kind of things? Man, I loved Don Johnson's viciousness in the show. I really liked his character just being the like down and out, just like, yeah, I'm gonna say like all of these things right in front of a person, and I don't care. I love that. Um, Rupert, who ultimately is our main character, is this consistent liar, and then it gets to the point where eventually, somewhere in the show, he starts telling the truth, but then ultimately we twist back into him going back to his default state, which is basically lying out the mouth again for reasons. So, going into this show, it's a fairly, I'll kind of tee people up to help people know what this show is about, because ultimately, without a doubt, it's a fairly odd show. Not everyone will like it, but at the end of the day, I'll tell you what kind of the pitch of this show is, and then I'll pitch you to the spoiler variation of the show. We'll give you a double 5-time count, and then we'll really go into spoilers. Hopefully, no one dislikes this video just because it ends up just kind of going through a certain kind of illness of sorts, which ultimately ends up being what it ends up being. So I do apologize if there are people struggling with certain kind of illnesses, which I will talk about in the teeing up concept of this show. But that's just what the show is. So anyways, let's go into it. So Rupert, I'm going to say the actor's name rather than the actual character's name, so I do apologize. Rupert, the guy, Ron Weasley, you guys know him. Rupert. Ultimately, we have Rupert, who is trying as much as possible to consistently figuring out ways to get out of work. He is consistently trying to, I'm assuming, get workman's comp, try to figure out ways to kind of work the system, and stay at home to where he doesn't have to be at work. So, ultimately, while he is consistently at home, just kind of playing video games and stuff like that, knowing full well what injury he has, you wouldn't be able to play video games and do this. So, we find out eventually when Rupert is going to his doctor, which is played by Nick Foster, of course, the guy from Shaun of the Dead. He ultimately gives Rupert's character a diagnosis. He ultimately tells him that he has, like at first, like Rupert says, I have elbow cancer, and Nick Foster goes, no, I don't think you can have elbow cancer. What he ends up having is cancer. I think it's called throat cancer. And ultimately, Rupert is realizing his mortality. He's ultimately, for the first time in I don't know how long, instead of lying to everyone, he's starting to tell them the truth. He's starting to tell them the truth because he's realizing his mortality. He's realizing that his life is probably sometime at a very short, brief time coming to an end. It seems like he tells all of his co-workers, he tells all of his friends, and in the end, they are very all viciously wanting to support him as much as possible, be overly friendly to him, and ultimately, in the end, his girlfriend wants to, let's just say, please him as much as humanly possible. And we find out something underhanded about his girlfriend as well. So, going into this show, we sadly see a man who is realizing his mortality until he gets yet another phone call from his doctor. Ultimately, his doctor, Nick Frost, is ultimately at very much his last rope's end of being a very poor doctor that has made some bad doctoring-like choices, and he is on his last rope if ultimately there's another patient that comes in and ultimately is misdiagnosed or something like that, that ultimately Nick Foster's character is going to be in some hot water and probably lose his license. So, ultimately, our doctor ends up going through and double checking some of the diagnosis that he had made on Rupert's character, and ends up giving him a call, mentioning that he's like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm really very sorry. Like, I ended up misdiagnosing you, and that is where the rest of the journey of the show goes into, is eventually, seemingly, at some point, like this guy was going to come clean with this diagnosis right away, But basically, everything consistently keeps getting pushed off. This guy doesn't mention that he is cured, or that he got a misdiagnosis, and because everything is starting to go right for him, everybody wants to like really be his like bestest of friend. It seems like his job is going much better for him, and this and that, to the point of there are so many times where this guy wants to reveal his secret, and sometimes by accident, stuff slips out. So, without a doubt, this story goes more and more crazy as we find out more and more episodes go along. I was really very interested by this show, as especially after we find out about the false diagnosis. And then after that, it just becomes a very interesting show, even though, it's kind of lying to a lot of people, hiding things, and then eventually it's getting to the point of escalatingly having to hide more and more things, to the point of somebody wanting to eventually having to confess for all the wrongdoings that they have done at some point. So, as I had mentioned, the overall kind of pitch of this story, let's go into the spoiler variation of this show. So, as my hair is fairly, there we go, finally. All right, to where I can easily... Anyways, let's go into talking about spoilers of this show. So I told you about the pitch of the show. Maybe you liked it, maybe you didn't like it. I don't know. Again, like, I was kind of like, man, this is a weird show. But then I got really invested, really intrigued, and I was like, oh my god, this is like the amount of just like skeletons in this main character's closet is just piling up. And I was really intrigued where eventually they would have to forcibly have all those skeletons be falling out of the closet, and Rupert's trying to push them back in. So, I think it's about that time to go into spoilers about this show. So let's do a double 5 time count. Hopefully, after this amount of time, you guys would be interested in watching the show if you have never before, or by and large just liked this show and want to see what it is, because ultimately, again, after this misdiagnosis, it's a much interesting show. So, spoiler time, it's about that time again to spoil this show. Sick note. So, I'm gonna kind of doing some rearing back to dare in fact let people know a little bit more about this show, from some of the stuff I cryptically tried as much as possible to leave off. So, Rupert's character in the very beginning of this show has supposedly an arm injury, which ultimately has him have a cast on his arm, which ultimately would lead him to probably get workman's compensation, and him being at home playing video games, lying about his arm injury, to the point where when he does go to work at some point, somebody notices that his sling is on the wrong arm, and to where he's just like, well, yeah, like I hurt my other arm because I'm compensating. And so, anyways, we find out that this guy is a big old giant liar, and he ultimately is consistently, like, we find out even more how much he consistently lies about a lot. During fact, the death of his girlfriend's pet at some point, and quite a few other things. So eventually Rupert goes into his doctor's office, and ultimately is checking on his arm, and the doctor finds out that, unfortunately, that our main character has supposedly cancer, supposedly throat cancer. And ultimately, our main character is just like, well, okay, well, I guess, like, I should start, um, like, I guess I should really get my affairs in order, and I should go to my girlfriend and tell her what happened, and I should be brutally honest with her and tell her what really truly happened to her pet and what had truly happened with a lot of other things, and this and that. And then eventually drop the bomb that he has cancer, supposedly. So, eventually, again, doctor at the end of his rope ultimately double checks the diagnosis of Rupert's character and calls him up, and Nick Foster basically tells him that he misdiagnosed him and he does not have cancer. The only problem is once Rupert has confessed to all of his coworkers, um, all of his friends and family and this and that, telling him he has cancer, and they all find out about it. Ultimately, we get to where ultimately our main character um, is having his mother and father wanting them to call him every day. Because I guess they just figure that if he doesn't call, that he's gonna pass away at some point. I don't know, but it kind of gets to where everybody is consoling this guy, and everybody at work is just kind of like, oh yeah, we heard the news, it's too bad, this sucks. He ultimately has a friend called Ash, that, yeah, he's kind of just a friend of his that we find out has a real story brewing eventually somewhere in the portion of the show, which I'll get into. Uh, Ultimately, we have Rupert, who consistently does gaming and consistently talks to this guy that he games with all the time, and he tells him the truth about everything. To the point to where this other gamer guy randomly that he knows is ultimately kind of making jokes and stuff like that, and like, dude, you haven't told them the truth yet, and this and that. So we ultimately get Rupert, who eventually realizes his misdiagnosis, and at first he goes and leaves a message to his girlfriend telling her that he has misdiagnosis and he's so relieved and this and that. But then again, everything is going so well to the point to where, like, his girlfriend is really going out of her way um, to please this character, and try and in an adult way, if I do say please this character, and very much eventually he finds out that, like, work is just kind of letting him kind of easily do a lot of stuff and this and that, and they're right behind him and like, hey, they're trying to support him, and he's like, you know what? How about I, like, not tell them my misdiagnosis till tomorrow? And then eventually his girlfriend is reading that she has some voicemail, and one of them is from him, and so ultimately he notices she's gonna hear his message, and so he tells her, hey, can you go and get me some, like, water or something? Yeah, because I'm sick. And she ultimately goes, he deletes the message, and then she comes back. And so reasonably, this guy is just like, yeah, I don't like I think I want to eventually kind of just break it to him, but I'll wait. So we end up having our Rupert going into his office, and eventually he ends up becoming like this very, like, influential, like, person. It seems like people are holding, like, contests for him and stuff like that, And then they realize that it's like, hey, if we have a person struggling with cancer, how about we just make him our, like, the face of our company, and how about we showcase him going through his every diagnosis. And so eventually we get to a point to where at some point in the episode it seems like everybody's starting to realize that um, he looks fairly normal, that if anything it doesn't really seem like he looks all that sick. It's not like he's losing weight or losing hair or dare say anything else. And so he ultimately has to go to his doctor, because him and his doctor is like, okay, well, I'm gonna not tell people that you misdiagnosed me, but like you have to make it look like I still have cancer, and and ultimately we have to figure out some kind of like treatment options and stuff like that, which ultimately the doctor puts everything as placebos to give to him, because again he doesn't want to lose his job. So ultimately we have this guy that otherwise is going through and faking that he has this illness, and to the point where eventually this guy ends up blurting out, because what happens is we find out that Rupert's best friend Ash is ultimately sleeping with his girlfriend. And supposedly what had happened is she was going to leave Rupert for Ash, Rupert's girlfriend. But she realizes that since Rupert's character has an illness, that she wants to stay with him until eventually he ends up dying or whatever from this illness. And so ultimately she's going to stick with Rupert until eventually this illness is over, and then she's right back with Ash. But again, she's still cheating on Rupert with Ash. So Rupert eventually like is getting a call. Ash is getting a call from Rupert, and of course they're in the same apartment together. And of course Ash is hearing a echo, and I think so is Rupert, because ultimately they're in the same room together. So Ash tries to sneak out this window and to try to get out of this home. Eventually, Rupert's girlfriend leaves, and Rupert mentions that he actually doesn't have cancer, and that he's like pulling off this con. And it ends up that Ash, via out of a window, hears this, and he's like, "Oh my God, you really don't have cancer?" And then Rupert ends up um, falling from this complex that Rupert is in. I'm assuming it's in like an apartment complex. He ends up falling, and he ends up just basically falling from the ground. So Rupert ends up calling Nick Foster's character, and ends up the doctor, of course, and basically tells him, hey, like, he tells him what all that happened. And so yeah, my friend has found out that, like, and the jig is up. What are we gonna do about this? And ultimately Rupert's character checks his pulse supposedly, and like they assume that he's dead. And so basically Rupert tells Nick Frost's character, um or Foster Nick Frost, the guy from Shaun of the Dead, the doctor. I'm saying this wrong now. I'm just gonna call him the doctor for the rest of the episode. Uh, we end up having Nick's character ultimately, um, having to dispose of this body because Rupert says, well, I'm keeping your secret, so you need to keep this secret by getting rid of this body. It ends up the entire time Nick's character is trying to get rid of this body, which is Ash, which he keeps calling Andy. It ends up that there keeps ending up being like switching of phones that are repetitiously happening to the point to where it seems that Nick switches his phone with Ash consistently because evidently they look like the exact same phone. And there is a consistent time throughout this entire episode where Nick is having the wrong phone, and so ultimately he keeps having to switch it out and this and that from the phones. So ultimately, because ultimately Ash's character is a hit and run, and once they try to dump the body. Nick tries to dump the body somewhere and ends up that they're like, oh, okay, this is hit and run. They ultimately end up finding out that Nick had bizarrely survived. So he's not dead. He's alive, but he's in a coma. And so ultimately, it gets to the point to where Ash is in a coma. And so now Rupert is just kind of very concerned if Ash is going to wake up and spout about everything that he knows. And ultimately, it seems like Ash can tell people from his coma by blinking and stuff like that. And so we find out that it seems that once Rupert has Ash's phone, how long his girlfriend had been cheating on him. And it seems like more and more we find out that Ash and Rupert's girlfriend's relationship is very strong to the point to where even when he's in a coma, Rupert's girlfriend appears to otherwise try to satisfy Ash while he's in a coma because story. To the point where we consistently have Rupert's girlfriend like, man, she just really likes this Ash character no matter what. It seems like she like really wants to be with this guy instead of being with Rupert, to the point where eventually it seems like these two people are going to have friction by the very end of this show. So we eventually get to the point of somehow or another that Rupert has to perform actual cancer treatments so that way they can shoot magazine photos and stuff like that and build billboards and stuff like that of Rupert starting to get his treatments so that way this company can do some PR stuff. And because Rupert's character is the PR guy to make this company look better when something goes horribly awry. So, justifiably, Rupert basically is asking his company, hey, how about I don't do as much public stuff because I don't want my treatment shown to the world. Like, I'm just, because ultimately, it's getting to the point to where Rupert is probably going to confess that he has been misdiagnosed, and because in all actuality, when he goes and supposedly goes to get treatment for this magazine to take photos of this, he ultimately was going to get fake treatment done by Nick's character, but then Nick has to leave to talk to a police officer, and the police officer is coming to him asking about his car tire being flat. It's like, hey, you never fixed that tire. And also he's asking him questions about like some mole that he had. And so eventually the doctor comes back in to find out some other doctor had started to get Rupert's character actual legitimate um, cancer chemo like treatment. And so Rupert is legitimately getting cancer treatment for cancer he does not have. And so now, because there's a lot of times where he'll be in the bathroom and just putting cans of stuff into his toilet and acting like he's sick when he's not. And but then again, he actually got true legitimate cancer treatment, and now he's sick for real for no reason because he doesn't actually have cancer. Um, but yeah, so now he took this treatment because the nurse didn't know any better, and so ultimately he took legitimate treatment to ultimately make him sick. And so eventually, the doctor comes in and sees him actually being sick, and he's just like, "Well, like, why are you being sick?" He's like, "Cause I was given real treatment, and cause you were the stupid person that walked out and didn't give me treatment, fake treatment, and this and that." He's like, like, well, I gave you like nauseum pills." It's like, well, those were placebos, cause yeah. So we go into this, and now we have these guys walk on eggshells because ultimately might wake up from his coma and spout out about Rupert's illness being fake, or ultimately they might figure out who hit and run Ash, and it might be Nick who ultimately goes into being the culprit for all this. And so everybody's walking on eggshells, and eventually it seems like Rupert is going to confess at some point in time to everything to the police or whatever. And so, ultimately, at one point in the episode, he is going to go and confess, and the doctor is calling him, saying, like, "Hey, if you know what's good for you, don't do this." It's like, do you want to go to prison for the rest of your life? And so when Rupert actually goes to confess to the police officer about this, we end up having because we realize that Ash's character bizarrely had died, and so Rupert is going to go and confess to everything, and so Rupert goes and confesses, and to the police officer, and he starts to confess. It's like, "Hey, well, yeah, my girlfriend had cheated on my best friend Ash, and so um like I want to confess." And so ultimately, while hearing this confession, because the detective the entire time wants to ask him about if Ash had any ties with any kind of bizarre like any bizarre ties with like Russians or all this kinds of like bizarre things that absolutely makes no sense. Um, like this cop is coming up with these ideas of what happened to Ash with these bizarre level like things that makes no sense whatsoever. And so Rupert is trying to confess that he had accidentally killed his friend, but in the end, we have another detective that runs in and mentions, "Hey, one of the nurses just confessed to killing Ash by accident because she forgot to she like bumped a tube or something like that. She bumped into some thing that turned his life support off or something, and supposedly that's what led to Ash's death." And then Rupert's like, "Whoa!" Like, so Rupert died by accident and wasn't even with me. So he's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't confess. And so ultimately, Rupert kind of just sways, and he just kind of mentions, he's like, well, yeah, he did cheat with my girlfriend, and then so did my doctor cheat with my girlfriend. And then the detective is just like, yeah, you should really get out of that relationship as soon as possible. And he's like, yeah, I probably should. And so eventually they have Ash's funeral, but weirdly enough, hilariously enough, Ash eventually just gets cremated. Coincidentally enough, Ash actually turns into Ash, or cremation, and ultimately is at his girlfriend's home, or his wife's home, because ultimately he has a wife with I think he has a kid. And bizarrely, while they're doing this funeral service, and ultimately they are at like the girlfriend's uh Ash's girlfriend, or Ash's wife's home, girlfriend, wife, whatever. Ultimately we have Rupert's girlfriend, who is trying to console Ash's uh wife, let's just say, for story's sake. And eventually Rupert's girlfriend kisses Ash's wife. And then she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was like, I was completely out of line there. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't realize, like, and this and that." And so and so the girl eventually just shrugs it off. And then when Rupert's girlfriend comes back to Ash's girlfriend, and just wants to talk to her, it's like, well, hey, like, I know a lot of people like mourn in bizarrish ways, and this and that, and I guess that was just you dealing with Ash's loss. And so eventually, bizarrely, while Rupert's girlfriend is talking to Ash's girlfriend, she basically uh opens Ash's urn, and ultimately looks into his urn, and she's like, yeah, I can't believe that's all you in there. Your eyes, your nose, your wang, and this and that. She's like, I can't believe it's all in there. And she like almost like is gonna like put her hand in the ash, or in the urn, to just kind of feel around or whatever. And then the girlfriend comes back and she's like, oh yeah, I've never seen one of these before. It's like, I just wanted to look inside there, just kind of, just, she's like, okay. It's like, dude, you were a weird girl. So it seems like at some point that Rupert's girlfriend should confess to Ash's girlfriend that she was sleeping around, but I don't think we're going to get to that. I think we're just going to get to the aspect of this girl eventually probably falling for Ash's girlfriend, seemingly at some point. Uh, and it seems like Rupert and his girlfriend are going to, or it seems like they actually broke up in this episode as well, because recently it gets to the point to where um, during the funeral, it gets to the point where she mentions, instead of it being in their home, she mentions her home. And because evidently he gave her the home that they were at to move somewhere else. And there is this consistent masked hooded assailant that keeps following Rupert around a lot. It seems like every time he is haunted by this hooded figure. Doesn't know who he is. This guy appeared right after Ash's funeral, so Rupert is assuming that it is Ash. That ultimately he is not actually legitimately dead, but he faked his death so he could try to find him and this and that. So Rupert is kind of dealing with some haunting of some ghost. And so eventually, we find out who that ghost is. Along the lines, in a portion, scrambling together some of the stuff that happens via some, um, especially when Rupert is getting tied to otherwise being a part of this whole like face of this company kind of thing. It was funny when he was kind of stalling and not wanting to be a part of this company. And so Don Johnson takes him into a room and whips out his schwanz and showcases that he's a man of only one ball. Because he's like, yeah, hey man, um, like I ended up getting cancer as well. So it's like, hey, if I'm willing to live a life like this, then you're willing to um, be a spokesman for my company. And we consistently have Don Johnson's fuse consistently very, very short. It gets to the point where it seems like he wants to just get into the bedroom business with one of his coworkers that keeps coming up with all these kinds of fragrances and stuff like that, and um, all these bizarre fragrances and stuff like that that she keeps approaching people with. Just like, oh hey, here's this, and they're just like, what the f is that? It's like, what's that smell? And she's like, oh, I came up with this like aroma like thing, and like it seems like people started to like it. Like, what do you think about it? And he's like, nah, I don't like the way this smells. So eventually, Don Johnson eventually has a meeting with this girl with these fragrances because ultimately he wants to get with her, and so she keeps mentioning about all the marketing ideas that she has for all the stuff that she wants to plan for in the future. And he's tying every single one of these things in with every adult like activity they can do with what she's tying with. She's like, oh yeah, I've come up with this like shampoo like stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, like we can both use that shampoo stuff in the shower when we're doing it. And then she's like, oh yeah, and I've also like created some like soap stuff. It's like, yeah, we can definitely use that soap stuff while we're doing it, because every single innuendo that it can come up with, to viciously just like be as like outspoken and shock value as possible, and that's what this character is. It's really just shock value, and ultimately he's just kind of there to just be like in your face about a lot of stuff, which I find fun to the point to where eventually when um, they're taking a very long time to give Rupert his cancer treatment, ultimately the nurse is having to forcibly give Rupert his cancer treatment, and Don Johnson is just waiting forever. It's like, dude, we need to shoot right now. We're on a timetable. Like, this guy needs to get his treatment, so let's get this going. Come on, come on. And so basically, he is going on safari or something like that. And so he ultimately has a gun on hand because he is going on safari. So he wants to see these photos. He wants to get all the shots done, and so ultimately the nurse is right there because Nick the doctor character left. So Don Johnson is wielding a gun at this nurse, telling her, "Yeah, give him cancer treatment and do it now." And so the nurse forcibly does so, and so we have to where like this Don Johnson character is just crazy, but also we have a character that is consistently giving people scented like stuff, and they're like, "Whoa, I don't like this." But she's very nice, and like she wants to try to be helpful and this and that, and I guess that's great. I'm ultimately assuming that if Rupert and his relationship ultimately does not rekindle back together, then I'm assuming like, well, here's probably an opportunity for Rupert to just end up with this this really nice girl that he works with, I guess, because that's where I'm thinking that this might go into, because she might feel like a lot of pity on him and might just be babying him and stuff like, I don't know. There's a number of ways that this story could go. But, yeah, let's bring up the mystery character, the hooded figure that keeps following Rupert around. Eventually, it gets to the point where at the very end of this story, we reveal who this mystery character is. And this mystery character is nonetheless the gaming guy that had been talking to Rupert this entire time. And he is wearing this very odd and bizarre, like Phantom the Opera like mask. And he's coming in there, like, hey man, I'm your gaming friend, because of course nobody knows who this is, and neither does Rupert. And he's like, oh, and like that's just how the show just ends. There's a lot of times where people are dancing on eggshells. There's a lot of times where there's so many secrets between a lot of people, and we eventually find out so many outlandish things about so many number of people along this journey of 6 episodes. Fairly interesting show. If you guys know about it, you know what I mean. Or if you just wanted to hear what I had to say regardless, just to find intrigue about the show, then ultimately you can go and watch 6 episodes of this show and enjoy it. But at the end of the day, I think that's all I want to say, because I spent 46 minutes talking about the show for it only being 6 episodes. So I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.